Kaitlin Tremblay defines a video game's world building as a backdrop to its story and game mechanics. She mentions that it is a continual process throughout development that is touched upon by nearly every discipline. I just finished reading this book, Collaborative Worldbuilding for Video Games, written by Kaitlin Tremblay, and I'm excited to share with you a bunch of insights I have from reading the book. Special thanks to CRC Press for partially sponsoring this video by providing me with a free copy of the book to review. To start off with Chapter 1, which is basically what is world building, Kaitlin makes it clear that world building is certainly not just narrative. It is narrative, but it is also music. It's level design, it's the visuals, it's the game mechanics, and to some degree, world building encompasses parts of the game that we never make at all. She mentions the term synecdoche, which refers to the process of defining a little section, but implying the existence of a larger section. For example, something might take place in a video game where maybe you read a book that was written by one of the characters. For example, this happens all the time in Skyrim, and you can then imagine what is the story of the author? What other books may the author have written? What rest of the story is left up to your imagination, right? You hear the monster that's hiding in the closet. You are then compelled to imagine the monster. And often the things that we can imagine are going to scare us more, right, than anything we can create on our own. This is a common thing explored, I think, really well by Scott McCloud in Understanding Comics. But it's this idea that we have a strong amount of decision-making to do when it comes to what resolution we want to apply to different elements of our story. In a world where we can create high-definition, photorealistic characters, do we want to do that? Or would we instead choose to make the character a little bit more generic so that people can ascribe different details to that character that relate to their own lives, and in a sense make it more relatable? Very interesting decision to be made here, particularly in how we want to tell the story. So it is a common thing that people say in video game development. They say, show, don't tell, and have the player play, don't show. And I think that is often portrayed in a little bit of a reductionist hierarchy, where it's always better to show the player instead of telling them, and it's always better to have the player play an experience versus showing them. And while I think to some degree it's certainly more immersive to go down this hierarchy, I think about Fallout 3, where you play as a little baby and you get to meet your father and you're walking around in a crib, and that is super immersive. I don't think that section of that game would be anywhere near as compelling if you were just shown it through a cutscene, or if you were just told it through reading perhaps a text prologue. However, we don't always want to give every story the same amount of resolution when it comes to the details with which we portray a certain element of a story. And I think Kaitlin Tremblay, she develops that argument a little bit further by explaining there's certain utility in telling, there's certain utility in showing versus having a player play through something. And I think it's some really interesting insights with respect to, you know, it's just more efficient to tell somebody sometimes. And if you want to be fast, better to just have it in a little text. If you want the player to skip over it, then maybe a little audio log that they find and can play, or just not play through it all. That might be the better way to do it. Especially when we think about games where really the ludology is at the forefront, we want the player to be engaging with the gameplay. It might make sense to have a little audio log play as they're fighting the bad guys, so that you don't have them watching a cutscene when they would actually prefer to be fighting the bad guys, right? So a lot of things to think about when it comes to this discussion, but that is a new term for me, synecdoche. Another term I learned from this book is the term neologism. And neologism simply means new word. And these neologisms can be incredibly powerful techniques to use within storytelling, because not only can they boil down big concepts into a single word, but they can also teach us a lot with respect to how all of the different parts of a world, all the different constituents, all the different players perceive those elements when they're referred to by this term. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about, how does everybody in Star Wars react when you say the word Jedi, or you say the word the Sith, right? Certain characters are going to have very different reactions, and I think that's so cool that you can create something that now, when I say, what does a Jedi mean to you, you're going to give me characteristics, right? and it's not quite a knight, it's not quite a monk, it's somewhere in between. And I think creating these unique words are what can ultimately help boil down so much world building into like a single idea. So I think neologisms are very powerful. The example she uses in chapter 2 is that of the Dovahkiin. Dovahkiin is used in Skyrim to refer to Dragonborn. This is, I think, the dragon tongue way to refer to this. So basically, she's just translated the word Dragonborn into Dovahkiin. But that does so much for the storytelling of that game, because some people use the word Dovahkiin, some people use the word Dragonborn, some people use both. And the way they use it, the times they use it, the context they use it, so much world building happening there. It's a really good example. But she also mentions that you don't want to overdo it, right? Neologisms can become quite taxing for a player to remember, oh, what the heck does this mean? And what does that mean? And there's 5 different alien races to remember. There's a lot of value to also just using proper nouns. So an example of a proper noun in Skyrim would be, as the Dovahkiin, you travel to the throat of the world, right? That's a proper noun place, to meet with these people known as the Greybeards. So the Bethesda Game Studios could have given a proper noun to the throat of the world, or sorry, they could have given a neologism to the throat of the world. They could have given a neologism to the Greybeards, but instead, just calling them the Greybeards, taking a normal word like gray and a normal word like beards, combining them together, I think you can deliver something different, right? It's something different, right? It's not necessarily better. It's not necessarily lesser. Again, it goes back to that earlier discussion we had with respect to the resolution of the different modes of storytelling, right? Play, show, tell. Similar thing here, where you've got neologism as sort of the deepest we can get in the world building, a completely new world, completely new word crafted for your new world. Or you could have a proper noun, which is somewhere in between. It's to some degree relatable. It combines concepts that we've seen before. And then you could just refer to them as, you know, knights in shining armor, right? This is a term that's just commonplace English, right? So I think it's a very interesting decision to be made with respect to these different levels. And I don't think Kaitlin quite alludes to this connection in her book, but I think this is the main takeaway I had of sort of piecing together the different things she was referring to, and I got a lot out of it for sure. So the other thing I wanted to mention in this book is that there is an awesome world building and character template within this book. Here it is, page 113. This is the world building template. This is an awesome resource for people who are creating new worlds. Maybe you're creating a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. There's some great questions here that can help guide you through that creative writing experience. Things like the geography of the world, the creatures of the world, the civilization, technology, magic, religion, history. Lots of great stuff here to sort of get those creative juices flowing. And a little bit later, let me see if I could find it, there is a similar template for characters. So this is the character sheet template, which is found on page 126, and immediately I thought, wow, I should be able to give this to my players for Dungeons & Dragons if they want to create their own player characters. I think these are really great resources. I'm happy she included them. Let me talk to you a little bit about stuff I didn't like about this book. The very first thing being those templates, as useful as they are, they certainly would be a lot more useful if delivered in a digital format. So I was annoyed that I couldn't download those resources and immediately start typing away and filling out those questions within a Word document. I think that was a missed opportunity. The next thing I wanted to mention is that she goes through a ton of examples of how world building is used effectively in video games. I love that. I love reading about some games that I maybe didn't have the chance to go deep into, like Sea of Thieves, and how she extracted some of the knowledge there. Because often I do play games not for entertainment value, but just because I want to know what are the game developers doing in this game, what are the sort of secret spices that went into making this game successful, and, you know, to what degree can I take those spices and apply them to a different game that I'm working on, right? That's what learning is, right? And so I think she does a great job of, let's say, coalescing all the different ideas from a bunch of games into these little gems, extracting them and giving them to you so that they can inform your game development journey. I really appreciated that. However, she doesn't really talk about failures. And when I think about my own career, I certainly have learned just as much, if not more, from my failures as from my successes. And so she's clearly somebody who has a lot of experience in writing for video games, so I was a little bit disappointed that she didn't talk about her own failures or failures of other teams and explaining, hey, here's something that somebody tried, and here's why it didn't quite come to fruition with respect to the world-building objectives they had. I would have really appreciated that, and I think it would have improved the book. I think it would have been useful, because when you're learning how to do something, whether that's world building or learning how to drive a car, it's just as useful to know what should you do versus what you should not do. So I think that was maybe something a little bit overlooked for this book. The next thing is she has a great amount of resources in this book. She does lots of references. Whenever she's mentioning another author's work, she does a great job of explaining what text she took that insight from. However, when she's referring to those texts, she does so in a format that I found a little bit of a pain. She'll do a superscript, and then you have to scroll back to the end of the chapter to try and figure out what that superscript was referring to, and she'll often include some text there, a little bit of context, and that's a pain in the ass, because you've got to sort of figure out where that reference is in the book, and then you got to scroll all the way back to continue reading. And you're doing a little bit of this, which gets annoying really fast. You feel a little bit like you're reading Infinite Jest or House of Leaves or something like that. So that was not a good experience. I think she definitely could have done a better job of just including those references and context within the text. There's certain ways to do that, right? I don't think MLA is an efficient format. I think something like Chicago, when it comes to formatting, probably would have been a better fit for what she's trying to do here. But, that may just be a limitation of writing books, right? The old school book medium format. But I think even in this medium, there's probably better ways to do it. So I think maybe that could be improved. And the last thing that I think this book was missing is probably the most important thing when it comes to video game development, which is player agency. I think if there's one thing that sets video games apart from any other medium, it's player agency, right? How can the player affect this world? And unfortunately, it's just not a topic she really explores. I know it's a topic that's in demand, because when I was teaching game development at Stanford, the number one question students had for me was, hey, how do I resolve the player having impact in this world when, if they do one thing differently, that leads to 2 options, and if they do 2 things differently, that leads to now not 4, but like 8 different options that the game can end in. Do you have an ending for every different path that the player can take, every branch in the tree? No, that'd be impossible, right? So you're gonna have to congeal it down, let's say, into only a few different endings. But then how are you still going to have the player feel like they had agency in this world and made meaningful impact? I feel like these are really important questions that our industry is still exploring methods to deal with. And with respect to how agency affects world building and affects, I guess, the greater narrative of the worlds that encompass our stories, there's not a lot of answers provided in this book. And I think that's a missed opportunity, because I think it's an important question to ask in our medium. Okay, all in all, this is a great book. I highly recommend it. The book is efficient, which is the highest praise I can give to a book. It's the best attribute I can ascribe to a work of literature, because it's not always the case, especially in this genre of books. But the book is efficient. It's only about 200 pages. I finished it in one sitting, and I found it very educational. So if you're interested in checking out this book, the title is, again, Collaborative Worldbuilding for Video Games by Kaitlin Tremblay, published by CRC Press. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and subscribe for more. Thanks.